Hello and welcome to Louise Singleton Creations. In today's video I attempted layering multiple colours of Aqua Cast water-based eco resin to create some gingerbread cookie style Christmas decorations. I'll be demonstrating the pros and cons of using the layering technique and then finding out if it's easier just to pour your Aqua Cast in one colour and decorate and paint it afterwards. If you want to see what happened, stay tuned and enjoy the video. So the style I'm going for today was inspired by the mould. Here's the mould. It's kind of like gingerbread cookie in style, isn't it? Those shapes and the style of it, it just reminds me of gingerbread. And so that's why I thought that using Aqua Cast instead of resin might be good in this particular mould, which, by the way, is from Moulds and Shapes. I'm going to be using very small amounts of Aqua Cast today, so I needed something very small to mix them in, and I found my little plastic mixing cups in my cup box. For my first colour, I mixed up 5 grams of water and 14 grams of Aqua Cast powder. And after giving it a good mix, I added a little bit of pigment from Homeware Design, and this pigment is called Ruby, and it's the reddest one I had. I wanted this colour for Santa's hat and anything else in the mould that needed to be red. And really I did mix up too much, but that's okay. You'll see what I did with the leftovers very soon. The first thing I discovered in this layering process is that it's quite important to get the consistency of your eco resin just right. If it's too thick, it's hard to move it around in your mould, and if it's too thin, that's even worse because the colours tend to touch each other, in the pattern and bleed from one to the other, and you don't want that happening. So avoid getting your mixture too thin. That is one of the first difficulties in this technique, because you're mixing such tiny amounts. It's very easy to add too much or too little water or powder. Most of this process will be sped up. It took me a long time. I didn't mind that. I do quite like taking a long time on things like this. It's the process of it that's enjoyable for me. But, if you don't enjoy that process, it's quite painstaking. If you don't enjoy that, definitely don't do this. It's one of those things you don't need to do this. You can pour your Aqua Cast in one colour and paint it afterwards. It's much quicker, but like I say, I was doing this because I enjoy the process and I wanted to see how it would look. So to apply my Aqua Cast for the larger areas, I used my stirring stick and just scooped it in, and then used a micro brush to just move it around inside the portion of the mould that I was colouring. I've seen people doing this by putting the eco resin into a bottle with a nozzle on and then squeezing it into the mould, but I like to have a little bit more control over it than that, and I didn't fancy doing that. I prefer this technique. So right, now let's speed up. So I needed several different colours for this project, and each time, if I made too much, I went on to my second mould, which is a bauble mould, also from Moulds and Shapes Christmas collection, and filled up parts of that as well. And it's little garden gnomes, not garden gnomes, what do you call them? I don't know. Is it gonks, some people call them? I don't really like that word. I like gnomes. I think it's a gnome. Anyway, you can see what it is, can't you? Give it your own name. I don't care what you call them. But that's what it is. And I'm trying to do a different part, a different colour, so they're all different. But you'll see soon that that second mould went a bit wrong. But never mind, it's all part of showing you the different techniques. And still I had some left. So here's a coaster mould, and I'm just dropping bits of Aqua Cast in random drops all over the place. And I do that with each colour, and it ends up looking a right mess by the time I get to the end. But actually, that coaster turned out really cool. So I continued in the same way for all of my other colours. The one colour that I did have a problem with, and at the time I didn't think it was a problem, it was the green. I made it too thin, the solution was too fluid, and you'll see soon what the problem was with that. And so yeah, we're nearly there with it. Now I'm on to the pink for Santa's face and the Gonk's noses, and I decided to add a little bit of mica powder straight to the mould to add a little bit of rosiness on the noses. And so yes, just a bit of pink mica powder around the nose and cheeks, and that gave it a little bit of interest in the finished pieces. Right then, all my Aqua Cast is cured. In fact, I waited for it to cure between adding a new colour each time. So there was never two different colours uncured next to each other. And that was to avoid the bleeding of one colour to the next. But it did still happen a little bit. Anyway, it's cured and it's ready for the layer that will fill up each cavity, and I didn't want to use coloured Aqua Cast to fill it up because I was concerned that the colour would be too strong and kind of bleed through my colours that are already in there, the cured layers. So what I decided to do was use a bronze mica powder to brush the mould with so that I could just use white Aqua Cast to fill up the moulds. And I just thought that was the safest option. And very soon I will demonstrate exactly why I did that, and you will see why it was a good idea to do what I'm doing here. Right then, with all the bits of exposed silicone brushed with the bronze mica powder, it was time to add the white Aqua Cast. Now, this is very different to what I would normally do. Normally, I would put the Aqua Cast into the mould and give it a really good bash about. And as you can see here, I'm doing it very, very gently. And that's because I didn't want to dislodge all that different colour work that I had previously put into the mould. It was all very delicate. That's why I've got it on my levelling table, so I don't need to bend the mould. If I need to move it, I can just move the levelling table and everything's fine that way. So yeah, I'm being very, very gentle and not doing too much of the banging and bashing. And because of that, when I demold it, you will see I did have some pockets of air in there that I just couldn't get rid of. Right, so speaking of demolding, it's time to take these out of the mould. Now, before you see them, do bear in mind that some of them will need some touching up. Yeah. We're going to see anyway. Let's see if it was worth all that time doing the separate colours. So yeah, on this one, I think definitely it was worth it. That matte look that you get from the Aqua Cast works so well for the cookie style, although some of the red was a little bit patchy. So yeah, I do have some patchiness with some of the colours. This one, it was okay. There was some bleeding on between the orange and the pink for the dress. But the main problem I had with the gingerbread people was I had air pockets in the Aqua Cast because I was having to be so delicate and not bash it around too much to, bring all the air pockets to the top. So that's one downside to this process is, getting air pockets in there. And the other downside I've already discovered is that there's some bleeding from one colour to the next. Santa worked out really good. I do like the finished Santa. And so, yeah, that was a definite success. And the gnome turned out okay too, or the gonk. Yeah, that turned out good, although I'm going to be giving it a big fluffy beard, so it doesn't matter whether the beards turn out well or not. And right, the house is where I had most of my problems. Yeah, as you can see, the orange colour bled into the white and also the green for the door. But don't worry, that gave me the opportunity to do some decorating on all of them. In fact, I did get a bit carried away with the decorating. But yeah, it gave me the chance to demonstrate that it's not the end of the world if these things happen, because there's such cool ways of decorating and embellishing them afterwards. Another one where I had some issues. It tends to be the ones with lots of colours close together that can have problems. So yeah, some success, some failure, but not to worry. We'll carry on regardless. One thing that really did surprise me was the coaster. I mean, it's not to everyone's taste, but it's definitely not what I was expecting. I did have some breakage on the handle. Part of it came off, but not to worry, I glued it back on again. The main thing is that pattern, I think, looks really cool. So here I'm just trying to get the broken bit out of the mould really gently without breaking it again because it was so thin. So yeah, that's one thing that I was concerned about that could happen with all of my other pieces, but I was amazed that it didn't. None of the bits separated other than this bit that you can see here, and I glued it on with some E6000 glue when it had time to fully dry out. And yeah, excuse me, yeah, I also put some epoxy resin on the top of that one, and it ended up looking quite cool. And you know how they say everything happens for a reason? Well, I'm quite a positive thinker, and I like to see the good in everything. And the fact that I had some issues actually led me to something I had never discovered for myself before. I wanted to touch up some of the red bits that had gone patchy. And so what I did was I took my Hydroflow sealer, which is from Elichem Resins, just the same place as the Aqua Cast. I poured a little bit, you can't see it, but it doesn't matter, I can explain. I poured a little bit of the Hydroflow sealer into my palette and then just put a drop of the pigment that I'm touching up into the Hydroflow and mixed it. And I knew you could do that with mica powders in the Hydroflow, but I'd never used the Homeware Design liquid pigment in the Hydroflow. And you know what? It made a paint that worked absolutely perfectly for touching this up. And so it meant that I could have exactly the same colour. I could go over the top with the Hydroflow sealer, which was pigmented with the same colour, and you would never know the difference. So yeah, I think that's great that I discovered that, and hopefully that will help you as well. So the white was going to be covered up with glitter, but I didn't want this big smudge showing through. So for that, I just used some white acrylic paint, and that helped to disguise it quite well. So I examined all of my Christmas decorations and found any imperfections and painted anything that needed painting. And then we were ready for some more decoration, which is the fun part. Now, as you will see, the faces of these Christmas decorations are not completely flat. each separate area has an indentation around it. So it's got all those grooves in there. And I really wanted those grooves to have a dark colour in them. So before I do that, I'm going to seal everything. Everything I made got sealed with HydroFlow sealer. And you'll see why in a moment. Okay, so everything got sealed and dried, and so about an hour later after sealing them, it's time to fill in all those grooves, those indentations, to give it a dark outline and to make everything really pop. And again, it's a little bit off frame, but yeah, you can just about see I've put some brown paint into my palette and added loads of water to it. So it's a really watered down acrylic solution of dark brown. And I'm just painting over the whole thing to, get paint into all those grooves along the edges of each colour. And then I'm just going to wipe it off. And that's why I needed to seal it, because otherwise it would have stained the face of the decoration, and I wanted it to just wipe off. So it's very important to seal it at least with one layer first. So that's all on, and now all I need to do is wipe it off. I've got a wet wipe there, like a baby wipe, and I'm just wiping over it a couple of times, and as you can see, it all wipes off but leaves the rest in the grooves and gives it a nice outline. And I did that with all of them. Right, now it's time for the fun stuff. So there's so many different techniques you can use to decorate your Aqua Cast decorations. And the first technique I'm going for is the glue and glitter technique. And I'm just going to do that on Santa's fur on his hat. So I've just got some PVA glue, painting that on, and then just sprinkling it with some fine white glitter. And for his beard, I'm going to do the same thing with the PVA glue again, but this time I'm adding some flocking powder. This is quite a thick flocking powder. I think it was supposed to be like a snow effect one when I bought it. I think it's from the Flower Soft range, and it was supposed to look like snow, but I thought it would be perfect for Santa's beard and moustache. And here he is, all finished. I do love this part, just making everything look so much better. I think he looks so cute. And by now, some of you are probably thinking, what was the point in doing all those separate colours in the mould and taking all that time if you're just going to cover everything up? Well, what can I say? I got carried away. Yeah, I know what you're saying, but never mind, eh? For this beard, I just had to try this. I had the Sizzix Expand Paste, and I really wanted to see how it would work on the Aqua Cast, to see if I could make a really fluffy beard, and it did work really well. It's a little bit tricky to apply. I could have used a brush, that might have been easier. But with some patience, you can just kind of get it on nice and thick. And I discovered that it works best if you do it in 2 layers. So anyway, let's look what happens when I heat up the first layer with my embossing gun. So I've sped this part up because it might have taken me about 30 or 40 seconds to do this, but that's a long time in a video, so I'm just speeding it up. And I did realise after a while that I needed to hold it with something because my fingers were burning. But right, as you can see, that expanded nicely, but it was patchy. And so what I like to do, once I've got that texture on there, it's really easy to fill it all up, like if you imagine you're filling holes in your wall and you're plastering it on to smooth it up, you're kind of doing the same thing with this. Just plaster it on until all the gaps are filled, and then you can do your second heating process, and that's when the real magic happens. So that was my first attempt and it looks quite good. I did definitely get better at it with my others and you'll see the finished results at the end. And yeah, I love that expand paste. For the snowman, I did the PVA glue and flocking powder again, and that one ended up looking like it was covered in desiccated coconut. So that one really did look like a fancy cookie. So what I've decided to do is show you everything right at the end in more detail because this video is already getting quite long. Another decorating technique that I used is UV resin. I found that if you mix some glitter with UV resin and then apply it, you get a really beautiful finish. And if you're new to UV resin, it's very different to epoxy resin. It just comes in one part in a bottle, whereas epoxy comes in two parts. And all you need to do to cure this is put it under an ultraviolet light, and then it's all done within a couple of minutes. So it's a very quick way of using resin. So I think that heart turned out really pretty. And you can probably see that I also did the windows with clear UV resin. I also used it for the gnomes' noses to give them a lovely shiny finish. And so yeah, that's another thing you can use the UV resin for. And I also used it to make sparkly eyes for my gingerbread people. And then I added acrylic gems for their buttons. So that's most of the techniques I used all covered, and we'll come back to those at the end to have a really good look at them. But first of all, let's see what happened with my other ones. So by the time it came to filling up my second mould, I'd completely forgotten that I had the really sensible idea of just filling up with white Aqua Cast on the other ones so that it didn't cause me any problems. For this one, I really wanted like a dark night sky. I went for purple and pink and used really strong colours because that's the background I wanted. Not thinking of the fact that it was just going to bleed through my image that I'd put on there already. You know, the the layering that I'd done already. Yeah, all my sensibilities went out the window with this one. However, it's good to show you what happens. I'd mixed up a little bit too much, but I thought that's okay because if I've got some plain ones, I can demonstrate that you don't need to do the layering to get a really cool result. You can just paint it afterwards. And so, yeah, I wanted to show you that. As it turned out, I needed to paint all of them afterwards because this is what happened. So now you know that if you're thinking of doing some layering with eco resin, don't fill it up with a strong colour. So with these ones, I used pretty much the same techniques I used with the other ones. So I won't show you all of it again, I'll just show you some highlights. But before I could do that, I needed a white background. So what I'm doing here is just very roughly colouring in all those dark parts with my white acrylic painter pen. And that works really easily. You could just use a paintbrush and, you know, some white acrylic paint. But this was quick and easy. And as you can see, I'm only scribbling it on, but that's fine. I'm going to be covering it with glitters and UV resins and all of that to get the same kind of effect I got before. It just gives it a nice white base to work on. So with these ones, I used the same method as before with the Sizzix Expand Paste for the beards. I really love that stuff. I think it works so well. And for the hat on this particular one, I'm using some flocking powder to give it a nice soft look hat. But you can use anything you want. I did one with some coloured UV resins all merging together. I did some with UV resin and glitter. You could just paint them as in the same way as I showed you before. Any technique you like, just have fun with it. This was so much fun, and I'm apologising now for the lack of focus on this bit. For this one's nose, I did want it to be a little bit pinker. So on top of the white that I'd already coloured it in, I used my pink acrylic marker to make it pink, and it looked a bit rough around the edges. So then I just finished it off with some pink UV resin, and that looked really cute. So let's look at them all completed, and I think you would never know that there had ever been a problem because it all got covered up. And I think they look so cute. What do you think? So I really did enjoy doing the layering of the Aqua Cast, but on reflection I would say, if I did this again, I would just do one colour. I would just fill the whole mould with one colour nice and quickly, and then just decorate them like I did today. Because really, once you've decorated them, they look really cool. The only exception is with like the really detailed things. It does help if you've poured your Aqua Cast in lots of separate colours. It would be a lot of painting and decorating for the really detailed things. So yeah, I've shown you both options, and I hope it's been helpful to you. I always like to show you the things that go wrong, because those are the things that we learn so much from, aren't they? I know I've learned quite a lot in the process of making this video, and you know what? I'm super happy with the finished results. I would like to thank Elichem Resins for sponsoring this video and providing us all with Aqua Cast, which is so amazing. I love working with Aqua Cast. I would also like to thank Moulds and Shapes for supplying me with such beautiful moulds. All links to products and discount codes will be in the video description below. If you've enjoyed the video, please do give it a thumbs up, and if you would like to subscribe, please do, and I will see you again next time. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.